Well, thank you all very much for coming here today. I know it's a tough time of the semester with the end of classes. My name is Anne Marie Murphy. I'm a professor at Seton Hall University and a senior research scholar here at Columbia's Weatherhead East Asian Institute. And on behalf of Weatherhead and the New York Southeast Asian Network, it's my pleasure to welcome you here today to a talk by Dr. Yayan Ganda Hayat Mulyana on the centrality of the Indo-Pacific to Indonesian foreign policy. Dr. Mulyana is a career diplomat at the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or Kemlu, where he has served in some of the most important roles and is currently the head of the Foreign Policy Strategy Agency. During his illustrious 30-year career at Kemlu, Dr. Mulyana has occupied numerous critical posts. He has served 2 terms here in New York City at Indonesia's mission to the UN, including one during Indonesia's 2007 to 2008 term on the UN Security Council. At that point, he served as the political coordinator for the UN Security Council team, or for Indonesia's UN Security Council team, I should say. He has served as spokesperson for the Indonesian Embassy in Singapore, as assistant to the special staff for the President for International Relations in the Office of the President under Yudhoyono. He has served as the Indonesian Consul General in Sydney, Australia. Dr. Mulyana has also served as an Indonesian delegate to many of the world's most critical international organizations, including APEC, ASEAN, the East Asian Summit, the Organization of Islamic States, and the WTO. He therefore brings a wealth of experience to the topic of Indonesian foreign policy today. I should also note that Dr. Mulyana is a graduate of the University of Padjadjaran, so he is one of the members of the Padjadjaran Mafia. He's also earned a master's degree from Ohio University and a PhD from Madison University here in the US, both on Fulbrights. And he has also done a lot of postgraduate training, including a program, the Joint SEPA UNITAR program on UN studies. So you are a Columbia grad in part, and it is our distinct honor to welcome you back for this talk on the centrality of the Indo-Pacific in Indonesian foreign policy. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Ibu. Thank you, Professor, for the kind words addressed to me. Let me start by extending our deepest gratitude to the Weatherhead Southeast Asia Institute and NYSEAN for organizing this wonderful talk. And thank you, Ibu, as well, for setting some of your precious time to be with me here. It is always great to be back to campus, and campus is always a place for me to rejuvenate knowledge, acquire new skill, and advance new horizons. And being in the middle of the distinguished students and faculty members of Columbia University, of course, this is really, really an honor. And thank you so much, as well, for the opportunity given to me to share our notes on centrality of the Indo-Pacific to Indonesia's foreign policy. My talk has been organized in the following way. This is the outlines of my presentations. First, I wish to shed light on the Indonesia's foreign policy determinants, and then the Indo-Pacific context and the consequences and responses, and strategies in relating to those consequences and the context, and of course the way forward. Like many others countries, Indonesia's foreign policy has been shaped by a number of factors, a number of determinants that emerge from its regional and global milieu and environment, as well as the domestic milieu. And of course, driven by national interest and supported by the institutional framework and the legal foundations of its foreign policy. But of course, another important factor that shapes Indonesia's foreign policy in relations to Indo-Pacific is the geospatiality. God has blessed Indonesia as one of the countries exactly located within or at the centers of the Indo-Pacific. And as an archipelago, it has every privilege in seeing itself as the key and central parts of the geospatiality of the Indo-Pacific. And of course, the regional and global milieu is one of the most important factors that shape the Indonesia's foreign policy. And for the discussions of our topic today, I wish to focus on the external milieu or the external factors of Indonesia's foreign policy in relations to the Indo-Pacific. And the question is, how have external factors been interpreted, been understood, been read by Indonesian foreign policy makers, the Indo-Pacific context? If we look at some of the developments in our regions, in the Pacific region, the policymakers, the foreign policymakers in Indonesia, the stakeholders, the foreign policy establishment have at least been seeing what is transpiring in the Pacific region as something that is shifting strategically from what we always believe as multipolar Indo-Pacific into bipolar patterns of relations in the regions, especially characterized by the increasing competitions between great powers here, United States and China. If I may use the data or study or index developed by Law Institute based in Sydney, the 2023 Asia Power Index. The study reaffirms what policymakers in Jakarta believe, that there is transformations in our regions from multilateral patterns to bipolar, from multipolar patterns into bipolar patterns. And of course, there have been hopes for a multipolar regional system, but it seems that based on this study, it is appearing misplaced. There have been expectations that that India and Japan would add to the dynamics in the regions, which by this dynamic it creates a new weight on the continuations of we believe in the past as the multipolar in the Pacific. But unfortunately, based on the study, the diplomatic influence of Japan and India is not as high as expected. India has been seen as to be too localized in its own regions, while Japan has been dwindling in terms of its influence, diplomatic influence, and of course grappling with the domestic matters, which include the diminishing youth populations that of course affects the sub-powers of the country. So this is what we see, this is what policymakers in Jakarta have been seeing recently, at least in the past 1 or 2 years, that there is a strategic shifting occurring in the regions from multipolar system to bipolar system. And of course, the story will be different when we are talking about the patterns at the global level, but at least, of course, some people would see that at the global level, the situation is still multipolar, like Joseph Borrell, for example. The the highest officials for foreign policy in EU says that the world is still a messy multipolarity, but studies from Lowy and also what we analyze at our agency sees that there is indeed a strong increase towards inclinations toward bipolarity in the regions. And also policymakers have been observing that there is an expansion of what we see as geoeconomy, especially driven by two great powers in the regions, China and United States. And China has introduced into the regions the BRR, the Belt and Road Initiative. And in addition to that, China also introduced the Global Development Initiative and the Global Security Initiative. And at the same time as well, United States, this is not only assuming the president, the chairs of APEC this year, but also this year has been assertive in terms of introducing the Indo-Pacific economic framework. Again, no other countries coming up with these strategic initiative that also help reaffirm the things that were believed as the bipolarity patterns of relations in the Indo-Pacific. Not only that, we also, policymakers in Jakarta also see that the characteristics of relationship have been at least depicted with 3 C's here. We have competition and we have rivalry. And this competition has also been confirmed and recognized explicitly by United States. If you look at one para from the last year's U.S. National Security Strategy, it is confirming that the post-Cold War era is definitely over, and the competition is underway between the major powers. Of course, this is between United States and China, and the strategy also recognizes that China is the only peer competitor, peer competitor to United States, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. So, but at the same time as well, we see that in the midst of these rivalry and competitions, we see also the dimensions of cooperation. It is not completely a rivalry or a competitions among great powers, but also there is a window for cooperations. And this has been confirmed by the statement of President Biden, as at least during his meeting with President Xi Jinping in Bali, on the sidelines of the G20 hosted by Indonesia, and of course with the facilitations of Indonesia. And Biden says that cooperation is still or remains the essential elements in the relationship between United States and China. And of course, this is something that is quite heartening for other countries, especially Indonesia, that in the midst of the increased rivalry, contentions, fight, tussle, as well as rivalry between China and United States, we see a light at the end of the tunnel, and we see the opportunity that we can exploit, especially by Indonesia and ASEAN, as something that we can push forward rather than emphasizing on rivalry and competition. But this is what I've been seeing. And at the same time as well, policymakers in Jakarta feel that the region is increasingly complex, is increasingly multifaceted, multidimensional, and of course, regional containment is inevitable with the introductions of IFAB by United States, as well as the introductions of GSI or GDI by China. this is has been seen as a clear indication or a clear indicator of the mutual containment between great powers in the region. Perhaps if we look at a micro level or technical level, those initiatives are, of course, designed to push the convergence of wealth in the region. But we look at it from the macro level or strategic level, there has been a convictions among policymakers in Jakarta that is really nothing more than just mutual conviction, even though that those initiatives are essential, like Indonesia joins both initiatives proposed by United States as well as by China. And we also recognize the competitions for influence in the regions, as well as making the region as a theater of proxy. Some analysts would see that some countries are being gray zoned and falling into the status as a proxy. But I believe that, I personally believe, and also many policymakers in Jakarta share as well, that we have been quite able to be independent, to be on their own in terms of voices and position, as well as perspective, and also in the exertion of influence based on our weight, based our power, especially as a middle power. And at the same time as well, in the midst of the proliferations of ideas proposed by great powers in the regions, we also witness, policymakers in Jakarta also witness the creations of forms of cooperation, which are unilateral, that include AUKUS as well as a Quad. And of course, both have implication, and both have as well different reception. Like AUKUS, for example, it has been quite being very sensitive matters to some countries in the regions, and of course to the great powers, especially China, has been negatively responding to this. But of course, I spoke with some colleagues from Australia that for Australia this is extremely indispensable, and Australia needs assurance in terms of being more independent, being more ready in responding to the dynamics in the regions, and AUKUS is the answers for Australia. The Quad, of course, its emergence has been seen as, by some analysts, as something that would be weakening ASEAN, but in reality, ASEAN is getting stronger. I could say that, and of course now under the chairmanships of Indonesia, we have been working very hard to revitalize, to rejuvenate the weight of ASEAN and the centrality of ASEAN within the dynamics of the regions. And of course, the complexity has been compounded by the continued presence of a few flashpoints in our regions, in the Indo-Pacific regions. It's quite discouraging for not only for the sub-regions, but also for other sub-regions, the situations in the East Asia, of course in the Korean Peninsula, with the unpredictable and uncontrollable behaviors of North Korea, with its continued threats of the tests of ballistic missiles and nuclear. And of course, this has been pushing Japan into taking a thoughts of having more reliable security assurance, and decided to introduce what Japan believes as the new economic security strategy, as well as the new security strategy in terms of defense, and elevating the commitments of Japan's to defense to up to 2% is something quite unusual, of course, in the past. And Taiwan Straits, it is not only after the visits of Nancy Pelosi to the regions, but also I think it has been really something quite disturbing to the dynamics of the regions. But of course, we appreciate the fact that all quarters, including China, has exercised the importance of restraints and the importance of peaceful way to come to the resolutions to the matters. And South China Sea, it has been quite worrying as well. And of course here we see with the situations that also invites the responses from the Philippines, and the additions of EDCA points in additions to the 9 points that the Philippines has in the lights of cooperation, in the lights of alliance with the United States. And also it adds to the complexities of the regions. And some people would see that this is not only in deterring China, South, not only in South China, but also in terms of deterring China's in relations to Taiwan Strait. So this is what we have been reading. This is what we have been following, and the policymakers in Jakarta sensing these situations. But at the same time as well, that our regions has been affected by non-traditional security challenges, which include food and energy insecurity that caused, of course, by the war in Ukraine, and caused by the drought and the weather uncertainty and the climate change. And of course, we are as well confronted by the implications of the pandemics and infectious diseases. And of course, the emergence of authoritarian turn in some countries in the regions, and the human environmental damage and cross-border and transnational crime. And these non-traditional security challenges will remain affecting the Indo-Pacific regions in the coming years. And also Jakarta, oh, my apology, I didn't manage to move this one here. Let me see here. On the non-traditional security challenges, we conceptualize them as the interdomestic challenges that affect the confluence between what are transpiring at the national as well as the regional and global level. The linkage between those two levels of analysis have been really to the attentions of the policymakers in Jakarta. And also we recognize that there is a proliferation of outlooks, the diversity of outlooks and strategies. And it is both alarming and welcoming in terms of seeing that not only countries in the regions place great attentions to the Indo-Pacific, but also a number of countries in the European continent. EU has published Indo-Pacific strategy the Netherlands, Germany, France, the Czech Republic, United Kingdom, and perhaps Poland also is interested in introducing. And of course, we have Canada recently. We have South Korea and soon Bangladesh as well in the preparations to launch the Indo-Pacific strategy. And perhaps there will be more countries will be presenting the outlooks and strategy. And of course, it creates some challenges of contending interests as at the same time also present the opportunity for synergy and cooperation. Contending interests, we don't know yet exactly in what way that these overcrowded conceptions of Indo-Pacific strategies and outlook will help creating durable, enduring stability and peace, as well as progress in the regions, and in what ways that country wish to relate one outlook to another outlook. And of course, for Indonesia and for ASEAN, the most important one is the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. This is something that we believe that this is the core framework that we could advocate as the basis for synergy and for collaborations. But still many things to be done in terms of bringing all together. But at least Indonesia and United States have come to an understanding, especially reflected within the joint visions as a result of the first ever US-ASEAN summit in May last year. And it is confirmed, it is highlighted here that the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States share relevant fundamental principles in the promotions of an open, inclusive, and rule-based region architecture in which ASEAN is central, and this is essential for Indonesia and for ASEAN, the centrality of ASEAN alongside partners who share in this goal. We haven't come anything like this with other partners, with other countries, especially formally highlighted in a document as the outcome of a summit as we have between ASEAN and United States from the first ever summits of both sides last year. These context that we are understanding and we are reading the policymakers, analysts in Jakarta, we also understand that those create some consequences. And the first consequences, one of the consequences is the structural shift. And we are convinced that it will be continuing rather than halted for a moment. This structural shift perhaps would be the architecture that will determine in what ways that countries in the regions will respond. Of course, the neorealist perspective on the international politics would agree in terms of the critical importance of structures, influence on the behaviors of states within that kind of structures. And of course, the trust deficit, and this is something quite disheartening, and new external pressure, especially the pressures that perhaps it is not openly, but countries in the region, especially ASEAN countries, feel that it seems that at a certain point, they feel that they have been pushed to choose one among the two great powers. And of course, it is quite clear for ASEAN and for Indonesia that we don't want to be pushed to choose. We don't want to be pushed to be a proxy, to be proxies of great power. We have the independence and active foreign policy, especially Indonesia. But at the same time, as well, this situation, this new context in the Indo-Pacific offer a new space for foreign policy. And of course, this is not only for Indonesia, but also other countries in the regions, and again, new challenges and new opportunities. And what are the responses that we have developed, and Indonesia and ASEAN countries have developed? If I may at least look from the Indonesian perspective, we are blessed by having durable doctrines of foreign policy pronounced in 1948 by Prime Minister Hatta. And at the same time, I understand that United States also, President Harry S. Truman pronounced a containment policy in response to the unfoldings of the Cold War in 1940s, 1950s. And the active and independent foreign policy is, we believe, and I believe, remain essential, critical to Indonesia. And it's really a viable policy that help Indonesia navigate both as Indonesia and as chairs of G20 and ASEAN, and also in the futures. And through this, that we develop measured engagement with all countries, and perhaps develop strategic hedging as well, and managing strategic competition. We anticipate perhaps this coming summits of ASEAN in September that include as well on the sideline is a parts of the summit is the East Asia Summit, and of course Russia and United States parts of the summit. And we anticipate if the situations what we experienced during the G20 presidency would reoccur, and this is, and of course can we also have a chance to facilitate the meeting between United States and China in Jakarta, in the midst on the sidelines of the ASEAN Summit, East Asia Summit in September this year. And of course, what is important for Indonesia and ASEAN is, when we are talking about the three C's, the competitions and the we have the cooperations element. We would love to exploit this element as the focus of our engagements with great powers. But we understand that competition is not only between United States and China, but between China and Australia, for example, and between China and other countries. Perhaps not at a strategic level, but again, this is, but still very very important for policymakers in Jakarta to understand or to follow. I also think through one strategy that probably, but the essence of this strategy is the active and independent foreign policy, that is the bebas aktif foreign policy. The strategy, what I call as the multi-alignments in non-alignment strategy, while at the same time that we maintain the non-aligned principle, but it is important to develop as many network, as many friends as possible, and think through of diverse of different mechanism, both in a larger multilateralism or in the forms of unilateralism that Indonesia can explore in the future. Of course, we have the basis, the stocks for these thoughts, and in the past we have what we believe as the million friends and my apology. Here, a million friends, zero enemy, and all directions of foreign policy and direct equilibrium, which probably some of the elements are still relevant in designing what we believe as the multi-alignment in non-alignment strategies. And as well, it's important for Indonesia to capitalize on the diplomatic leadership with the centrality of agency, especially ASEAN. And of course, we succeeded in presiding in G20 last year. And we have now the opportunity to assume as the chairs of ASEAN. And we would like to give emphasis on the importance of the diplomatic leadership and the centralities of ASEAN in the dynamics in the Indo-Pacific. And at the same time as well, Indonesia is utilizing the diplomatic leadership role as a middle power and as a bridge builder and net contributor to peace and stability. We recognize the increasing importance of the role of the middle power. As, for example, in the context of the G20, we have India, we have Indonesia, and we have Brazil. And with the emergence of the global south, with the cementations of the formations of the long-standing global south, I think the role of middle power will continue to play extremely important role in the futures. And it is important as well for Indonesia to capitalize on the strategic trust. It is not only due to our success in convening the G20 summit or the G20 meetings last year, but also the active role of the president. One of them by visiting Kiev and visiting Moscow as part of the president's commitment to promote peace and to promote to come to an idea of bringing the conflict to an end. And this is something that also help Indonesia gain more and more trust, more strategic trust. And in advancing our role in the Indo-Pacific, it is extremely important to capitalize on this strategic task. But it's as well important for Indonesia to look into how others have been seen in terms of trust. And let me make reference to the study from the ISIAS, Yusuf Ishak Institute, the State of the Southeast Asia Survey 2022-2023. And there are questions that relate to the trust in terms of partnership and in terms of leadership. The ASEAN futures, for example, is the ASEAN futures at the hands of partnering with China more or with United States more? The answer is very interesting. In 2021, the responses is still that United States is more pivot in terms of being partners for ASEAN future, and then in 2022. But if we look at the survey in 2023, there is a significant increase from 57% to 61.1%. And the increase of trust in Cambodia and Laos, for example, is quite significant, from 21 to 80%. I think this is quite an exponential swing from low confidence to extremely high confidence in some amongst Southeast Asian countries. And let me continue with another finding. If ASEAN were forced to align itself with one of the two strategic rivals, which should it choose? And the ASEAN survey result, 38% to almost 40% China and 61% United States. And of course, the implication is this, but of course, this is a survey. But again, it's interesting for us to capture the message of the survey. And let me also present the next one here. If ASEAN were to seek out third parties to hedge against the uncertainties of the United States and China strategic rivalry, who is your preferred and trusted strategic partner for ASEAN? And here we have European Union. Australia, interestingly, has been seen differently. And European Union, almost 42.9%. India, 11%. Japan is still the most trusted third parties in the region, in the Indo-Pacific regions. We have Republic of Korea and United Kingdom. And of course, for someone like myself who is trying to understand from the context of Indo-Pacific, in what ways that that European Union can also contribute to the benign dynamics, to the positive dynamics in the regions. I have spoken with a number of European colleagues, recently one from France, for example, that eventually what European Union and European countries intend to be parts of the regions, they see that the region is the futures of international relations, and it will be the pivots of the global dynamics. And that's why they also publish outlooks and strategies and want to be connected and engage with Indo-Pacific. Another things that Indonesia has the opportunity to do is to leverage the diplomatic influence that Indonesia acquires. And again, if we look at the index, Asia Power Index published recently by Lowy Institute, Indonesia maintains the comprehensive power number 9 or rank 9, but the diplomatic influence of Indonesia is significantly increasing. The elements of diplomatic influence has been shaped, among others, by the successful presidency of Indonesia in G20, the commitment of the presidents in advancing regional and global peace and security and stability and prosperity, and the support for what we call as the global efforts that include as well the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And this is extremely an important step that we welcome. And even our diplomatic influence has surpassed a number of countries in the regions. and almost close to China. And this is something that we would like to capitalize on, to leverage as a middle power in the regions. Let me conclude by say a few words on the way forward. As I said earlier, that the Indo-Pacific has been increasingly central to Indonesia's foreign policy, and Indonesia has strong commitment to play significant role as a middle power, capitalizing on the diplomatic influence, strategic trust that Indonesia acquires. But in order to play more and more significantly, so there are areas that Indonesia can enhance, especially within the framework of leadership assets, which include geography, natural resources, and economic capability and military capability, and technological capability, and of course the quality of democracy and leadership capital and cultural influence. And something that I learned from the 2023 Asia Power Index is that while Indonesia is culturally rich, I think Professor, as you have been to Indonesia many times, with more than 300 ethnic groups and the archipelago, which is rich in culture, people, and land and experiences. Unfortunately, from the index, the elements of cultural influence has not yet been enhanced to a level that give a particular significant weight to Indonesia's foreign policy. So this is something that we need to work on further to cultivate cultural influence as the assets for diplomacy and Indonesia's foreign policy. So terima kasih Ibu, thank you so much. I think that end my presentations, and I would love to have the discussions on the points that I raised in my discussion, in my presentation. Thank you. Terima kasih banyak.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Mulyana. That was a real tour de force. The international level, all of the intermistic, non-traditional security challenges, and then ASEAN's response. I mean, you gave us a master class in strategic thinking about Indonesia. And as you know, Indonesia is the largest, most important country that most Americans know nothing about. So I am so grateful to you for coming here and giving that presentation. There's so many questions I want to ask, but perhaps I'll start with one, which is that throughout your discussion, you continually referenced Indonesia as a middle power, right? And if we look at Indonesian foreign policy, on the one hand, it has traditionally exhibited what is often termed classic middle power diplomacy, right? An emphasis on multilateralism, an emphasis on soft power, on diplomacy, eschewing the use of military force, respect for international law, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, when we look at Indonesia today as, you know, one of the top economies, with certain McKinsey and others projecting that Indonesia will be a top 10 economy within the next decade or so, with the building up of infrastructure and the influence that you just cited from the Lowy Institute, Indonesia's diplomatic influence is almost as big as China's. We often hear about Indonesia's rise. So is there going to be a transition where Indonesia is something more than a middle power in the Indo-Pacific? Is that something that Indonesians aspire to or envision in the coming years?
Thank you, Ibu. That is, I think, very important questions. And we have always been aspiring to be the largest, the fourth or the fifth largest economy in the world in 2045, and as a developed country. But of course, when we envision Indonesia towards that point, it gives us both opportunities and risks or challenges. The opportunities for Indonesia to equip more what Indonesia can do. And of course, it is not in terms of economy, but as I said in my presentations, in terms of the quality of population, the quality of democracy, the quality of government, the quality of leadership, the quality of institutional setting, the quality of development, the quality of health, the quality of environment, and the quality of education, and of course, the quality of technological acquisition, and the quality of statecraft, and of course, these elements are essential to what we believe as Indonesia rise. And at the same time, as we rise to that point, we have to think through what types of foreign policy and diplomacy that we will perform. Can we shift significantly from the classical into the new styles of middle power diplomacy? Yes, while at the same time we preserve our convictions on the importance of respect for international law, rules-based international order, multilateralism, but at the same time also we innovate in terms of strategies. And this is something what I said earlier as perhaps like, can we develop what we call as the multi-alignment within the non-aligned principles, and these strategy allows Indonesia to innovate with as many partners as possible in different formats of partnerships and cooperation, while at the same time preserving the principles of active and independence. And I have a feeling that this doctrine will endure for so many years. I understand that Truman Doctrine ended as soon as the Cold War ended as well. But the Hatta Doctrine, the doctrines of independence and active foreign policy, it continued as the Cold War, while both doctrines were pronounced in the first years of the Cold War era, but their durability is different. But I believe that, and I have a strong feeling that the durability, the enduring relevance, the pertinence of this doctrine will continue and will guide Indonesia to the point what people believe as a new styles of middle power diplomacy that Indonesia can advance, and among other guided as well by what I coined as the multi alignments within the non-aligned strategy. But again, the ingredients are as well extremely important at the domestic level: the quality of population, quality of governments, quality of leadership, and of course the quality of democracy, and the quality of technology, and many others that are emerging from the domestic milieu.
See, thank you. Well, I have many questions that I would love to ask Dr. Mulyana, but I certainly want to open it up to the audience. I don't see any questions from the audience at home. If you do have one, please put it in the Q&A box. Is there anybody here in the in-person audience who would like to ask a question? Yes, please. Just wait for the microphone and just identify yourself, please.
Good afternoon, Pak Yayan and Professor Asli. My name is Davira. I'm currently studying in SIPA, MPA, in Economic and Political Development. Thank you so much, Pak, for the presentation. So my question is that Indonesia is projected to be the fourth largest economy by 2045, and India is leading ahead of US in terms of economic power. So my question is that, how will Indonesia respond to the change in the economic positions between those countries?
Thank you, Ms. Nadia, for the question. Economy is an essential ingredient of power, at least what I understand from Low Institute definitions of power. That is the elements of economy or economic diplomacy, that also the ingredients of diplomatic influence. The shifts of some countries rising from developing or emerging economies into developed ones, as we envision, we hope that Indonesia arrives at that point. Of course, it will change the configurations of the global geoeconomic setting, and probably within that context, it carries with them responsibility as parts of the global community. And of course, this is something that probably can be utilized to push more what we believe as the convergence of wealth, when wealth will be more shared by the members of the international community. It is important, of course, to assure the progress and prosperity through the economic achievement for their own nation, their own nationals. But at the same time, like today, we have China, we have United States, we have European Unions, and we have as well the emerging economy in the global South, for example. And as we see as well, the configurations in the G20 with the emerging economies, we have from Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa, and from Latin America as well. And the new configuration also carries with it responsibility to shape and to push more convergence of wealth and prosperity in the region. And also the implications are the need to develop or to create an architecture, the geoeconomic architectures that would allow these aspirations to materialize or to realize. And I think the responsibility would be resting upon those countries that include Indonesia and India. And but also I have as well a thought on whether there is parallelism between the geopolitical positions of countries that rise to be developed countries in terms of economy, as countries also rise in terms of geopolitics. Will Indonesia be, or India be, great powers like United States and or at least like China today? Will India as well? But then again, the Lowy Institute research has confirmed that India needs to do more, even to be a great power in the regions. So it's sliding back to what is categorized as middle power. And will Indonesia also be a great power, if not superpower, in 2045? It's questions. But again, in my opinion, it is not enough to be a power in 2045 by economic achievement, but we need to have as well the quality of democracy, the quality of populations, and the quality of governance, and many other domestic elements that the country have to have. Thank you.
Well, there's certainly quite a number of Indonesian students here who are studying to enhance that human capital that you think is so important to Indonesia's future. I really loved your 3 C's: cooperation, conflict, although I guess conflict came first, and then complexity, because I think what we're clearly seeing today is that things are becoming so much more complex, right? We're seeing conflict on a lot of geostrategic things between the US and China, whether it be over international waterways, which are so critical to Indonesia as an archipelagic state that sits right at the, critical sea lanes of communication at the heart of the Indo-Pacific. And yet you also mentioned all of these transnational security issues, pandemic, climate change, et cetera, that no country can solve on their own, which makes things so complex. So when you mentioned that you hoped that under Indonesia's leadership, ASEAN could push China and China and the US, focusing, my apologies, what you mentioned Biden's comment, right, at the G20, that there were areas where the two countries really had to cooperate. Can you give us a sense of where you would hope that during this year of Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship, Indonesia, working with its ASEAN partners, can try to push forward cooperation on what range of issues, and have perhaps even temper some aspects of competition if possible?
Thank you, Ibu. Indonesia has taken as the theme of its ASEAN chairmanship the ASEAN Matters, epicentrum of growth. When we talk about ASEAN Matters, ASEAN does matters in its role, in its contributions to promote peace and stability, as well as progress, not only in the regions, but also beyond the region. When we are talking about ASEAN as the epicentrum of growth, it is, of course, the idea of ASEAN that ASEAN is the driving force for economic progress within ASEAN and beyond the Indo-Pacific regions as well. But of course, we cannot do it alone. We understand very well the importance of partnership and cooperations with all dialogue partners, or with all partners, and the complexity is too high. But again, we are convinced that we are in a position to navigate this complexity that he mentions, Ibu, and of course, in the designing of a course for ASEAN to be at the driving seat, at the driver's seat of this dynamic. And At the same time as well, we would hope that ASEAN during the Indonesia's chairmanship, of course, within the framework of the ASEAN Matters and the epicenter of growth, could as well facilitate any opportunities of cooperations, collaborative framework that include ASEAN partners, which are as well essentially the great powers, as I'm talking about, and of course it is as well important for ASEAN under Indonesia's chairmanships to make ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific actionable. But again, making it actionable, it will require cooperations, collaborations, and a new space for collaborative frameworks between ASEAN and its partners. And with that, we would hope that the chairmanship could gain as much as we wish. And of course, internally, we are confronted by the situation in Myanmar. I think Indonesia has been working very hard, like the previous chairs of ASEAN, Brunei and Cambodia, in terms of Myanmar. But yes, this is something critical, something pivotal. But of course, we don't want to see that ASEAN bogged down or dragged by. There are many other important points in ASEAN: energy security, right, food security, connectivity, maritime cooperations, transitions, and of course the digital transformation as well. And of course, the agreed elements within the three pillars of the ASEAN community, the ASEAN economic community, the ASEAN social culture community, as well as the ASEAN political and security community. Those are extremely important. Of course, we do not pretend that we can finalize or we can finish all the things at one time, but we would hope that we will be able to materialize a new level of achievements within ASEAN, especially within the three pillars of the ASEAN community, and of course progress in responding to the situations in Myanmar as well, and of course in the discussions of the COC, in the discussions of the infrastructures, cooperations within the frameworks of the Indo-Pacific, ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. So this is extremely important for Indonesia.
Any questions from the audience, or do I get to keep talking? Go right ahead.
Thank you, Bapak. Thank you, Professor. My name is Bayu, and I am from SIPA, MPA, same as Davira in Economic and Political Development. But currently, Indonesia is taking a tough stance on exports, especially on exports of raw minerals, which I think in hindsight, the proposal is mainly to try to boost investments and industrialization, as we see how a developed industry can help us gain power in world politics and economy. As a high level diplomat, how would you communicate that to our partners? Because we are under so much scrutiny. For example, we're being sued in the WTO, which I don't know is still relevant or not, and a lot of countries are I think I see is preventing us to have that boost in or in economics, we say the big push towards being a developed country. How would you, as a diplomat, communicate our policies to our partners all around the world, especially in the Indo-Pacific, of our policies of the government? Was that clear?
Thank you for the questions. And yes, there has been a debate on what is the best course by country like Indonesia, and endowed by rich natural resources, but at the same time also need investments from other countries as well as technology in processing these natural resources. And we have been for so many years exporting natural resources, commodities, natural resources in the forms of raw materials, and then we learned as we export those raw materials totally in raw, that if we introduce another ways of exporting and processing the raw materials into a better products in Indonesia, and we will have added value in terms of selling or exporting the products. But again, the game of export-import as well, ruled by WTO, and Indonesia is part of the WTO, and many other countries as a part of the WTO. Here, there's a delicate balance between the need, the national need, the need that Indonesia has to cater in gaining more, perhaps not profits, but perhaps gaining more advantages from processing those raw materials. But at the same time, also there's international obligation, and some countries has filed the case under WTO. Again, the government is quite clear in terms of our positions. Yes, it is the right of every country, but at the same time as well, some would say that it is not Indonesia first, but it is time for Indonesia to elevate the capacity, not just dependent on exporting raw materials totally in raw conditions, but more than just that. It is as well parts of Indonesia moving towards a more capable country in terms of industrialization. When we communicate this to partners, and many partners could understand, but of course not all understand. They could understand, but they could not accept, of course, the argument. But again, there is a necessity. It is a timely necessity for Indonesia to shift from just exporting raw materials into a more rewarding products based on those raw materials. Nickel, now bauxite, and we anticipate other mineral as well. And I think all the things are framed within the necessity, the timely necessity for Indonesia to have more than just capability to export raw materials, but more than that. I hope I answered your question. I hope I'm not too diplomatic in answering your questions.
Okay. Everybody's getting brave now. Why don't we start here and then go to the gentleman in the back?
Good afternoon. My name is Ifa. I'm also from SIPA and from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well. So, Bapak, I have a question. Before, Professor Murphy said that Indonesia is one of the most important country that the West knows nothing of. And Bapak also mentioned that before that Indonesia is losing Indonesianist in America now. So I was wondering, like, with our positions, our strategies, or what we Indo-Pacific, is there anything that we plan to do to like strengthen the positions, to put Indonesia on the top of like Americans' mind? Because I also noticed that to Colombia in a massive amount of people they just know that, oh, there's 50 people in SIPA right now from Indonesia. Yeah, I think maybe that's it. They know Bali though. Yeah. Is there any strategy that we trying to have? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eva, for the question. The question also applies to United States. Recently, I spoke with colleagues from the policy planning staff of the State Departments of United States. And also they asked me in what ways that United States can be more visible in Indonesia, as we want to see Indonesia being more visible here in United States, the presence and the visibility of Indonesia. As someone who had been in United States for 6 to 8 years, and my graduate program under Fulbright scholarship, and then posted here to Times in New York at the UN, I tried to understand what the United States expect from Indonesia, and how Indonesia has been seen and understood by the United States, by the people of United States. And I must admit that the role of Southeast Asia centers, or the studies of Southeast Asia, as well as the Indonesian programs here in the United States, are extremely, extremely important, in addition to the program that Indonesia's embassy and consulate general have developed here. I understand that making visible require not only human resources, but also investment that include, of course, the funding. I recognize that, like, Cornell University has the Indonesia project under Benedict Anderson or George Kahim or Ruth McPhee and many others, and replicated in a number of universities with the Southeast Asia Center. And they have been very active in doing research, extensive research in Indonesia. And they returned to the United States and introduced more, in Indonesia in all its dimensions, not only politics and government, but also economy and cultures, yes, Ibu, and cultures and natures as well. I sense that the regenerations of Indonesians in United States need to be revived. Of course, not only working with the university, and of course, university still the primary institutions that could drive interest of United States people in Indonesia. But the same thing also occurred. I always say to my colleagues from the National Security Council as well as the State Department that when they asked what you think about Indonesia and ASEAN in terms of seeing United States as partner, I always say that Southeast Asia wants United States to be near, but not too near, want to be far, but not too far. But we want, but in terms of Indonesia's, the feasibility of United States also has been perhaps the reflections of the survey from Yusuf Isyas Institute is also a testament, or it says testimony to the ample support, or to the ample welcoming attitudes of Southeast Asians toward the United States. I think United States can capitalize on, and of course we have not yet had any survey here. It will be interesting if there's one or two institutions doing survey in United States or in Indonesia, making a survey and asking United States people, citizens, about Indonesia and what they expect from Indonesia, and known not only through Ticket to Paradise or Eat, Love, and Pray, start by Julia Roberts, but also more than that. And of course, United States as well can be understood and seen not only through the television series like Chips and many other, but again, soft power and people-to-people contact is still extremely important. Next year we will celebrate the 75th relations between United States and Indonesia. I think this is an excellent opportunity for both sides to enhancing the greater visibility, mutual greater visibility between United States and Indonesia. And of course, our dear friends who are studying here as well, you will serve as well as the envoys of Indonesia, presenting Indonesia to the community of scholars and students here at the Columbia University. And of course, through Ibu as well, this your role is extremely important. And hopefully there will be more Indonesian programs, not only with Indonesian language, but also joint research, joint studies in all many areas that relates to Indonesia. There are a few centers of American studies in Indonesia. University of Indonesia has, I don't know, but still the focus is on cultures, but we need to have more. Perhaps the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta could push more, could advance more. Of course, we see other countries have been very aggressive in terms of promoting cultures with the country's corner at universities, even at the primary and secondary school level. This is something that we need to consider. Thank you.
Why don't we take you, and then we have one question online here.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Dr. Yayan. My name is Adi. I do Master of International Affairs here. I have many questions, but I'm trying my best to put it into two main questions. So first, it's duly noted that Indonesia's country, we acknowledge that soft power is really important. But then when I come to the United States, I see that it is inevitable that in here, we also talk about the hard power. When we talk about China, we talk about the United States. Of course, there's also economic competition, but also at the same time, we also talk about security aspect. We also talk about the hard power in that sense. So as Indonesians, how Indonesia see itself in terms of the hard power in the upcoming years? Especially when we notice that many studies says that in the 2045 something, we're going to be for largest economy in the world. That's the first questions. And then the second question is, as Indonesian, I also noticed that we have rowing between two reefs policy, mendayung di antara dua karang. So basically, if I may put it in simple terms, we are rowing between the great powers. A couple decades ago, we are rowing between the West Bloc and the East Bloc. Currently, we might see rowing between the United States and the China. So we have the rowing between two reefs policy. Would that be any visions for Indonesia to see itself as the reef itself rather than rowing between the two reefs? Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Adi. As I mentioned in my presentations, the way forward, the leadership assets is extremely important, and one of the elements of this leadership assets is the hard power. Perhaps one of the elements of hard power is the defense or military power. The problem with hard power manifested in defense or military component, the increase in defense budget, for example, the modernizations of military, the armed forces, Navy, Air Force, Army. It always, in international relations, it always encourages the security dilemma. It always encourages others, if not to take the same step, but to respond suspiciously or to respond uncomfortably with one country's decision. But again, it is as well the reality that each country has a necessity to upgrade its quality of defense, the quality of military. We always say that we do the minimum requirements of the military and defense capability. But again, the question is, as we emerge as a great power, perhaps in 2045, should this emergence also be compounded, be followed by the military capability that has a much higher level than we have today? And if it is so, in what roadmap and visions that we can develop in terms of, are we going to advance more the Navy as we are archipelago, or the Air Force? And we have been talking about the porous maritime, the maritime fulcrum that Indonesia has advocated. But I think this is something that we need to think through as we move toward a new status from middle power, for example, to a great power. When we are talking about great power, does that mean us also that we as well upgrade in terms of military capability? But again, it is always parts of the evolutions of one country. We'll see China now. We have seen United States and India and many other countries as well. And of course, Indonesia will be required to think through this matter. And can we be a reef? I have been speaking with so many partners, diplomatic partners from different countries, and we are blessed with the fact that we have always been seen as an honest broker, as an honest partner, not as a constraint. but as a facilitating friend, but as a cooperative friend, as an open friend, and always a constructive friend, and of course, trusted one. We gain more and more strategic trust here. A reef can be an obstacle, can be also a potential partner. We are, of course, cruising among many reefs globally, but of course, as I am convinced, as I explained in my presentations, that confirmed by the Lowy Institute study, that the Indo-Pacific patterns of relation is inclining towards bipolarity and rowing between two reefs. The big reefs are extremely becoming obvious now, and this really affecting the strategies that we need to develop. But again, we never see ourselves as a reef, but as a partner, as a bridge builder, as a middle power, and as a net contributor to peace and stability. Thank you.
We have a question online from Margaret Scott, who is a journalist and an adjunct professor at NYU and a founding partner of the New York Southeast Asian Network. And she would like your views on the R20 meeting in Bali that took place alongside the G20 meeting, and perhaps your view on the role of religion in Indonesian foreign policy more broadly.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. It's an interesting question. Looking into the not so frequently discussed dimensions of Indonesia's foreign policy. Indonesia is a country that is, of course, blessed with the diversity of religions, and the religious experiences and the traditions is part of the long history of Indonesia, stretch long back to the times immemorial, I can say it in that way. And of course, religiosity that is manifested in religious manifested in religious movement through different religious organizations, from time to time have given a significance on what we need to advocate in terms of foreign relations. But of course, this is something probably not obviously seen as I mentioned in my presentations, the domestic elements of Indonesia's foreign policy, which include the interdomestic components, the democracy, development, sustainable development goals, and many others. But again, as a student of American foreign policy, when I was in college, I recall that United States foreign policy had been to some degree influenced by what John Winthrop preached, making United States as the city upon a hill, that when United States reached the prosperity like today, United States wants this prosperity not just keep to itself, but to be shared with other countries. And it is the manifest destiny of the United States to share with other countries. I understand that President Kennedy and President Reagan as well have invoked the notions of this city upon the hill. We don't have any specific doctrinal elements that affecting our foreign policy in that way. But of course, there are there are issue areas that that invite the interests of numbers of religious groups in Indonesia, such as the situations in the Middle East, conflict, Palestinian conflict, and of course the Balkan, the Srebrenica massacre, for example, during the Bosnian War, and of course many other, the Rohingya as well, for example, attract the attentions, but not specifically as the core elements of the foreign policy. The R20 is an idea driven by Indonesian civil society, seeing that perhaps by having the R20, we could enlarge the architectures of the network, as well as the architectures of engagements of cooperation within G20 through other elements. Even some also propose the M20, the music 20. I don't know if in India they would also something the same occur, proliferations of maybe a new 20 watt. This is I recognize that some musicians who have strong interest in diplomacy and want to support the magnitudes of Indonesia's leadership within G20 introduce what they believe as the importance of musicians being together among G20 countries into a forum they call as the M20. But I understand that the R20 has given an added value in terms of the enlarging structures of cooperations within the G20. Although we need to do more study, more research in terms of its impacts and its impact on the effectiveness of the work of the G20. There are many working groups as well. There are many other components within the architectures of the G20. But again, we need to measures, to do more research in terms of measuring their implication and the effectiveness on the work of the G20. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think that since we have been peppering you with questions for well over 90 minutes now, that we should probably end our session and let Dr. Mulyana get a bit of a break. I would like to thank everybody who joined us online and here in person for coming out. And please join me in a great round of applause to thank Dr. Mulyana. Thank you.